Welcome to the second of our 3 videos of worship for the 29th of August 2021. In this video, Elaine is going to read us our Bible reading, which is a shortened version of Genesis chapter 41, and then I'm going to speak a little bit about it, and then we're going to respond at the end.
Today's Bible reading is a shortened version of Genesis chapter 41. When Joseph had been in prison for 2 years, Pharaoh had 2 dreams. In the first he was standing by the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside them. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. In the second, 7 ears of corn, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other ears of corn sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin ears of corn swallowed up the 7 healthy, full ears. In the morning, Pharaoh's mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt, but no one could interpret the dreams. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "When I was in prison, there was a young Hebrew who interpreted dreams for us." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph. "I hear you can interpret dreams." "I can't," Joseph replied, "but God can." Then Pharaoh told the dreams. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The 2 dreams of Pharaoh are the same. God has revealed what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears of corn are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterwards are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless ears of corn scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land so severely that the abundance in the land will not be remembered." The dream was given in 2 forms to say that God's mind is firmly made up. So let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of Egypt. Appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 good years. Store up the food and hold it in reserve to be used during the 7 years of famine, so the country may not be ruined. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, I appoint you." And history unfolded the way Joseph had foretold. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
A long time ago, I went to a talk by a chap called Paul Bradshaw, who was a professor in a university in London. He was talking about the way that the early church treated people who wanted to become Christians, and in a way, it wasn't what you expect. They didn't simply say everybody's welcome. On the contrary, they thought that the Holy Communion service should be reserved for people who were firm believers. And so they had what later, I suppose, became confirmation classes. They had a course that people used to do when they were catechumens, that's to say, people exploring the Christian faith. And Paul Bradshaw said, and what was this course? Well, we don't know an awful lot about it, but what we do know is that it focused on the Old Testament books of Genesis and Proverbs. That's a bit strange, isn't it? I wonder what it was about the books of Genesis and Proverbs that was so helpful for young Christians in the view of the early church. Well, you might like to read those 2 books and answer the question for yourself. I suppose Genesis is about 3 things, isn't it? It's about the creation of the world and how God makes the world work. It's about the covenant that he wants to explore with us and invite us into, that he makes with Abraham. And then it's about people's personal developments. And in the stories of Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, we can see that people are not the same when God has finished with them, that God has got things to do with developing their characters and their personalities. And this story in Genesis chapter 43 that we've had today is part of God's development of the character of Joseph. Joseph has to learn something about God in this story. But it's not just about that, is it? It's also about a disaster that was facing the land of Egypt at the time. Today we're having a service about climate change. Climate Sunday it's called. You don't need me to tell you that there are disasters that are going on about the climate. Well, perhaps the word disaster is the wrong word because the truth is that there can be things that happen with the climate that have very different effects on different people. Why are there disasters at all? Well, it might be because of individual sin. Somebody might have done something that leads them into a particular problem, a bad decision that they've made. But if it's a widespread disaster, it's more likely different from that, isn't it? Well, I suppose one of the disasters in the book of Genesis is the flood that washed everybody away in the time of Noah. And actually, it says, doesn't it, that God saw that people were evil and he resolved to sweep them all away and start afresh with Noah. So that was an example of something which was definitely about sin. But there are other kinds of disasters in the Bible that aren't particularly about people's individual sin. And actually Jesus expressly says when he's talking about the collapse of a tower in Siloam, or when he's talking about the question of why a man was born blind, he said it's not because of an individual's sin, although there are different causes for that. In this particular case, I do not know why the disaster came, but in a way, the writing might have been on the wall, hadn't it? They do say that when you dream, it's your psychology, your inner person, your subconscious trying to tell you something. And it may be that Pharaoh had these particular dreams because of something in the state of the land of Egypt. It doesn't say so, but it may be. You don't need me to tell you that there is something that's up with the way that we are treating the world, which is leading to disasters. But the thing is that disasters can have very different impact. Here are a couple of lessons from history from the World Vision material which underlies this sermon. In Bangladesh, there were two cyclones. There was one in 1991, there was one in 2007. They were very similar in terms of their wind speeds and the course that they took across the country, but they were very different in terms of their impact because between the two, a lot of work had been done about trying to mitigate the hazards of a cyclone. An early warning system had been put in place. There was better weather forecasting. Cyclone shelters had been constructed so that people had somewhere to go when their part of the country was hit. And that meant that the second cyclone had a lot less impact in terms of disaster than the first one did. Or take the year 2010. There were earthquakes in Haiti, or Haiti, depending on how you pronounce it, and Chile. In Haiti, there was a devastation, there was widespread destruction, there was great loss of life. In Chile, there was also damage, but it was much more limited. Why is that? Well, Haiti is a much poorer country than Chile. There was lack of government, which meant that in the response to the disaster, there was a lot of confusion about what to do. There was lack of infrastructure, so power couldn't quickly be got to the places which had been devastated. There were no roads and rail systems to be able to get things going. In Chile, there were these things, even though there was still quite a bit of problems. The impact of a disaster depends really on what you've done to try and prevent it. And of course, that's the lesson of this Bible story, isn't it? Pharaoh gets his dream. Joseph is called in to interpret the dream. Joseph interprets it and says, what can be done about this? And so there is a system put in place in order that the produce of the good years can be stored up and something can be made to prepare people for the poverty. It's also true that Joseph himself, it was part of his personal development. He had to be committed to the welfare of the people with whom he now was, despite the fact that really he wanted to be with the rest of the family, and he wanted to be in the promised land that God had promised to the children of Israel. What's the modern application of such things? Well, I suppose there are three things, aren't there? The first is listen to God. There are many people who have got ideas about the way that the things could go wrong. We call it risk assessment these days, don't we? It doesn't necessarily take a dream or a direct vision from God to give that. But we do know that there are things that are going to happen, even though we don't know when, and we can plan for how to deal with them. Act, put systems in place. Make sure that there are ways of handling things. There are many charities nowadays which are involved with trying to make things better overseas, and they do have an impact. We can petition our government to restore our aid to 0.7% of gross domestic product. We can petition our government to get more involved with making aid to do with making things better in other countries rather than with what we want in return in terms of trade and compliance with things. And be prepared to help others. Joseph had to be removed from his own people to go to Egypt so that he'd be on hand to help with it. We may not all be called to live overseas and do something about problems practically, but we should all be concerned about our neighbours. Jesus said our neighbours are the ones who need help from us at critical situations. Are we going to be the ones who make a positive difference to help? Let's pray that we are, you and me. Let's pray that we can find practical ways of looking at the world and seeing how we can help. Here's a response, an act of commitment prepared for us, and I suggest that we try and make it our own. Let us say together, Lord of life and giver of hope, we pledge ourselves to care for creation, to reduce our waste, to live sustainably, and to value the rich diversity of life. May your wisdom guide us, that life in all its forms may flourish, and be faithful in voicing creation's praise. May the commitment we have made this day be matched by our faithful living. Amen, amen, amen. That's the end of the second of these 3 videos of worship, and again, to follow us into the next one, please just choose it when it appears on the screen after I've finished speaking.